Right, is it you now, Laurie?
Okay then. Right. Track take 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Rather than sort of give a nut and bolt, you know, put 3 solder balls here and then cook at 180 for half an hour, I thought I would just pick out some themes and try and talk around them. Some of them are problems and issues and debates and variations on the way people deal with them. And I thought I'd just sort of say what I do. It's very much just the way I do it. In all of this, you'll already realise that there are as many ways to build track as there are people, and almost as many as there are tie bars. So this is just my take on it. First of all, the laying out, to sort of pick up on Steve's question and take that further. I've templotted all of Yeovil, as you know, and I've done it twice. I've not had it done in a whole roll, which would always be the ideal, but I did invest in an A3 printer, which at least halves the number of sheets I need. To start with, I would cut them up and join them as accurately as I could to get the smooth curves dry, because one thing I haven't done that I should have done was to have done them in a thickish card, perhaps 160 grams, 200 grams, which the printer would just take. So I've just used ordinary copier paper at 80 or 100 grams. And as soon as you start to stick it down, it stretches and distorts. So that has always been a problem. So one of the ways I've got around that has been to, for each board, join up the whole of the templot sheets. This is one board here. This is an elevated track, so I've actually had to cut away the bits in between. While they're still all dry, they obviously don't distort. I've then sellotaped them onto what I use for the track bed, which is 2mm ply, and I've used that then to cut out the track bed and smooth the track bed by eye, and I chamfer the edge because I cut it to where the edge of the ballast is going to be, and then stick that down where the plan tells me it should be on the board, so that I've got the right gaps either side. And that way, the track bed then forms a very good guide as to where the templot plan will be when I've plastered it all and it's all starting to wrinkle and stretch. But you can lay it down. If you're quick and get it roughly in position, you can then ease it. And again, I keep coming back to this. My final alignment is always by eye to get it right, or as right as I can. But with the edge of the track bed marked on the templot plan and the track bed cut pretty accurately to that, you can get a very good job of getting it very close. So that's how I lay it out. A brief word at this stage about the glue I used to stick the templates down onto the track bed, and that was a very strongly made up wallpaper paste. One of the great advantages of using this is that it stays very liquid for quite a long time, and during that time it's very easy to slide the paper templates around and get the alignment correct for them. It has much less initial grab, and so you're much less likely to tear the paper templates, even when they're just done on thin copier paper. But I've got a little bit more to say about that later as well. Yeah, this was just another example here. There are some errors. You can see here there's a step. All right, that's a join of 2 sections where I was sticking it down, and you can see that the track is stepped there. So there are always going to be inaccuracies, but I get the best alignment I can. And where there are variations like that, for instance, where you've got a platform, I try to make sure that the error is perhaps to make the platform 1 millimetre wider than 1 millimetre narrower. I make sure that where the ends of sidings are, if there is an error, they're slightly more spread than too narrow, just in case you end up not being able to get the infrastructure set in between. Well, you can see the siding ends here, for instance. They don't quite line up, but the step I was showing was back here. But they're within a millimetre or two. And if you think about it, that's what, a foot, and a foot in 200 to 400 feet. You know, how accurate is the surveyor going to be? So that I'm very happy to accept. So that's how I decide where it's going on the baseboard. And then I actually build it on the workbench, because I would just break my back if I was doing it over the board all the time. And this is the layout for a single point. I've got a slab of Tufnol that I used when I was building my tie bars to a previous design that needed quite a deep cutout, and I milled out a chunk there for it. The Tufnol is slightly longer than the 20-inch of rail lengths that we have, because like Bob, I like to build it in as big a sections as I can, because I think that helps the alignment. Subsequently doing my tie bars to a different design, which doesn't need a big cutout. So now I've gone back to what I originally used about 40 years ago, which was 2 sheets of glass to get a nice flat surface. And I sellotape the templot down onto that along the edges. I don't stick it underneath because I am terrified really of introducing undue variations in height. So a lot of what I do, perhaps unnecessarily, is designed to try and minimize the variations in height, the vertical alignment of the track. So there's no sellotape, there's no glue underneath where the track is going to go here. The template is all sellotaped down the edges, and then I stick the sleepers onto that. And I now use a cyano gel for the PCB sleepers and butanone for the ABS ones. And that sort of leads on now to the next theme, which is, what do we actually build it with? Bob did all of his point work with soldered construction. Mick uses the ABS Easitrac system for all of his. Jerry solders all of his point work. I use a mixture. And this is part due to the fact that I started out years and years ago when there was only soldered construction. And I've never really got on with fabricating the crossing separately and then implanting that onto the sleeper base, whether it be plastic or soldered. I'm just happier building it up rail by rail, and that really mandates having a soldered construction for it. The other advantage to me is that I'm a messy worker, and again, I do my best to get not just the vertical alignment but the lateral alignment, the smooth curves and the straight straights. It's something that I pick up. It's just what I see. Different people pick up different things from different models, but that's one of the things I pick up. So I try to do what I can to mitigate it. What happens when I'm building very often is that there are kinks and bits of straight where there should be a curve, and then the curve is too sharp and then it shallows out, even doing my best to follow the exact line of the templot rail. So soldering, at least at intervals, gives you the opportunity of fixing the rail at different points, making sure you've got the curve right all the way along. And of course, you can adjust any soldered joint almost till the cows come home, until you're perfectly happy with it, or as happy as your patients will allow. So those would be the two main reasons why I like to use some soldered construction in my points. Part because I find it easier to make up the crossings, and part because it allows me adjustment to get the alignment through some point work as right as I can. I also feel happier with at least the main part of the toe soldered rather than done with Easitrac, particularly where you have to take away the inner claw of the rail, because otherwise there's nothing to hold the rail into the claw there. You've only got the claw of the chair on the outside, and I'm just happier soldering that there. The crossing we've already talked about. That last one, the last long sleeper, fixes the exit of the rails from the point. I usually put 2 or 4 either side of where I'm going to put my insulation gaps. I'm a bit naughty here because I put those where the rails are evenly spaced, because it's easier to cut and fill the gaps then, rather than where they should be, right down here. You can see those marks there, which indicate the proper position of the joint between the crossing unit and the closure rails. That helps stop the rails creeping. Not that they would creep if they are anchored at the start of the switch anyway, but also it helps electrical continuity. You've automatically got the link between the switch rails and the stop rails where you want it. And then I've put a couple in there. That would be the start of the switch. This was an earlier one, and I now try and put a soldered sleeper or a couple of soldered sleepers about every 5th, because I find that allows me to adjust the alignment more precisely than leaving what's here 7 sleepers there and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sleepers there. You can get quite a bit of side wobble on the rail there, even when it's anchored each end there.
Could I just add something? It's just, as you've been talking, I've realised I've forgotten a few things. It's getting on a few years since I made any now. The business, like we've both done, of building even a single point or a formation on a separate board rather than on your actual layout, it means you can lift it up in regard to checking alignment and curves and everything else. I've found it the best way to check that is to lift something up, face a window so that the light shines along your rail, and it's a wonderful, you know, daylight's the best thing I've found. Sometimes if you've been doing it at night time, the light from your ceiling or wherever, it does reflect along the rail. It's great that you can lift something up and look along it, and then because it's maneuverable, able to handle it on a small board. That's a real big advantage I found.
I'm with you 100% on that, Bob.
I do exactly the same thing. I got a selection of lumps of white-faced melamine, white-faced chipboard, which I use for making Pointwork on. And I stick my, albeit non-templates down on there, and I use double-sided tape to stick the sleepers down, but otherwise it's broadly the same. And as Bob was saying, it gives you the ability to pick it up and squint along it and just see if there's any issues. As I've said many times, the human eyeball is a fantastically accurate thing, and particularly when you're looking along a rail, even the slightest discrepancy shakes out at you, and you can adjust it.
I picked up a tip off Norman Solomon when I've been building my track, and I put a mirror down on the rails, and if you get the orientation right, it gives you a lovely view along the track work, the rails, and it does pick up any discrepancies that you can fix, before you go any further.
That would be the way to get the alignment if you actually build directly onto the board, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And on your point, Laurie, about plans, I had a bit of a dilemma with a plan. I had a Halsey shed in that the railway lines in the shed were not parallel. I think they were out by about a foot or something, or 1'6" from end to end. So you're talking about surveyors, like that. Now, for me, I can't model that discrepancy. because I'm a bit OCD. So my template does not follow the plan in that respect. I can't build in other people's mistakes. It just goes against the grain.
It's not
So mine will be parallel.
Yeah, I mean, one problem I have in lining up the rails to start with is actually parallax. And although I'm only talking about 1 mil between the bottom of the rail and where that line is drawn on the plan, it makes quite a difference as to exactly where your eye is above it, whether it's dead on vertical or not. And I quite often find that by the time I've come off the end of a point, I can be half a rail's width out, a rail's width out. Mm-hmm. But I always go back to doing it by eye and accepting what the eye sees and then adjusting it as I lay, even if it means that I veer away slightly from the template plan that's on the baseboard, because that you don't notice it then, or you notice the smoothness of it. Whereas if you go back to the actual plan as on the baseboard, there's a great big kink there.
I haven't,
and that offends me. So
when I was doing all the point work, I haven't used any guides or whatever. The track clearances, you know, for point work, check rails, whatever, for all of that, I haven't used a single. I know you could years ago, you could buy strips of the correct thickness to the tolerances of the association, but throughout everything I've done, I've used it's quite a small open bogie with 4 wheels that you can look down on as it passes through the frog, the check rail, whatever. And I made sure that everything worked. That was the thing. For something especially as big as Fencehouses, it had to work. Laurie mentioned earlier, any misalignment or uncoupling or derailment, whatever. I see Mick's holding something up there. It's essential that the thing works. All very well working to standards and all the rest of it off a drawing, but if the damn thing doesn't work 100%, then it leads to frustration. Some of my clearances are they're bigger than they should be, but that's only when you see them in a photograph or if you're looking directly down. From the normal viewing position, people like to see movement and without jerkiness or bumping over trap joints or whatever. So it just comes down to, it's got to look right, but that would come anyway if it's going to work. And that's the main criteria. You're not building a static display thing. You want to see realistic movement as much as we can be. But like Laurie said before, there's so many different ways of approaching this. As far as I'm concerned, it works. Fencehouses has been on the go now for nearly, 11, 12 years. We don't get a lot of problems with the track work.
It runs superbly, Bob,
it was mainly me that built it anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be function first, hasn't it, if you want to play trains?
Yeah.
And by and large, the jigs make it work. And the eye makes it look right. I find.
Combination.
And although the scale is small and people say, oh, I don't know how you do that, you know, I haven't got the eyesight for it. In fact, there is a working degree of tolerance in the wheel and track standards, which you can exceed and it can still work. I find that you can err on the side of widening a gauge or widening a back-to-back slightly. But where you do come a cropper is if you try and make it just too tight, the check gauge or the back-to-back's too tight. That's where the problems mostly arise for me anyway.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I've got a few, like Bob, I've got a few of my check rails which are just eased out a tad.
Yeah.
I think that to some extent is if you're running reprofiled N gauge wheels, I think there may be an element of some of those maybe not quite so happy, and sometimes you've got to ease it a little bit more on sharper curves. If your curves are very easy, my minimum is 2 foot 600 mil, although nearly all of my stock, not so much the locos, but certainly the stock, all has to run on wade bridge as well. I provide quite a lot of the wagons for wade bridge when we take it out, and that's got an 18-inch minimum radius on the main line. John gets 8 coupled locos around it, Bully Pacifics, Arthurs, ends, that sort of stuff. But he builds them to it. I mean, I certainly wouldn't recommend anything below 2 foot, but even with 2 foot radius, you do have to sometimes just tweak them a little bit. But as Laurie said, you need to go the hairline bigger, but certainly not any smaller.
Yeah.
You've got to think as well, it's not just track here, it's your wagons. If your W irons are perfectly parallel, that's fine, but if you move slightly one way or the other, it can throw one wheel out.
Yeah.
And we had a problem on the crossing, backing from the down main across the up main and into the colliery siding, going over a diamond crossing, and it gave us all sorts of problems. I can't remember which exhibition it was, but I thought, I've had enough of this. I tweaked it so infinitesimally smallly, a check rail, and ever since then, it's basically worked. We could back over 20 odd wagons at a time. The difference between just enough and either one way or the other can make a difference. But again, that's the advantage of soldered construction. I could tweak it with a pair of tweezers and a soldering iron.
I remember that diamond, and I know it was the electric couplings that gave much more problem than the DGs. I think that's not so much the track, that's because Electras are dependent on, I believe, on buffers to do the buffers to do their job, which in 2 mil is more of a challenge. DGs have got that buffing plate, which is more forgiving of that kind of thing. I mean, Mick's here, he knows much more about Electras than any of us. But am I right with that, Mick?
You certainly need to use the buffing facility. There's no buffing plate, and you need to make sure the couplings work in essence.
Yeah, we've had a few problems with some of the colliery wagons, buffers not level when you're looking at a side elevation, and when you're looking in plan, they're not perfectly parallel either. That's got to be sorted, and it became more apparent. Some of the colliery wagons lately that Chris made, I put hook and bar on them, and that does you definitely need the buffers to be in the right place. Some of them weren't, and that caused derailments. But I mean, in general it works, but things have evolved, the way we've built wagons, the type of couplings and everything else. It's so long since we operated on it, I'm beginning to forget how we did it. So soon, hopefully soon, we'll be back there.
Oh.
Can anybody remember where the club rooms are?
Vaguely.
Okay, so the last thing I was going to say about the way I do it anyway, this explains why I don't stick this all down, is because when I've built the point, I actually cut along the edge of the sleepers to extract it when it's all finished, and I leave the template stuck to the sleepers, and that helps keep lateral stiffness for the whole thing. I do find that a pure ABS built point, particularly the fairly long lead ones, if you're approaching prototypical formations, it can be difficult to keep it in its rightful alignment, where it's straight, or get the right curvature to it if it's on a curve. And two things can help me keep it right. One is having these intermittent soldered sleepers, because that will give an inherent stiffness laterally to the track and stop it parallelogramming, if I can make up that word. And the other thing is the template remaining stuck to it functions very much like the milled web in the milled track bases that we started off with for the Easitrac points, and stopping that shifting sideways. And then I stick the template down onto the plan on the baseboard. So that's just another couple of little points there. I was just going to give one or two more examples of where I choose to put ABS and soldered sleepers. This is a curved crossover. These are D12, so they're quite long leads, which is why there are so many soldered sleepers at the switch. I've just decided to do all the switch soldered here. There's a batch in the middle, which are where the side of the insulation joins are going to be. I've done all through the crossings, and they of course come very close to overlap, where you've got a crossover in a 6 foot way, and then the same on this side. So that's just another example. Getting a bit more complicated, a double junction and a couple of points attached as well. Started to put extra little ones in on the points here to give a bit more adjustment of the rails through the point. So I've got an extra one in there and there and there. Diamond is a really, well, it's not a really obtuse diamond, but there wasn't much scope to put ABS there before I got close to the crossings where I wanted to be able to adjust K crossing and the V crossings. And the V crossing then merges into the crossover track, and then a couple of long lead points there. And then the pièce de résistance, a lot of soldered stuff here. This is a tandem, and under my approach, there's virtually no plain track in a tandem where you haven't got a crossing or a check rail or a switch or an insulation joint. So I just soldered the whole of the tandem. And then this is effectively an outside slip with an inside slip. And again, it's so tight that I just decided to solder the whole lot there.